Hey, welcome back. I'm the Book Guy, and today we're going to do a deep dive into the trilogy The Empire of the Vampire by Australian author Jay Kristoff. There is a lot going on in this trilogy. There's so many different genres coming together to create something unique. Critics have debated what genre to classify this trilogy as, and I truly don't think there's anything quite like it. This is a dark fantasy with vampires. It has a strong Gothic vibe, plenty of horror scenes, a whole lot of tragedy. There's some overlap between grimdark and dark fantasy and epic fantasy, and there's a decent presence of romance and smut, so some people have called this bromantasy.
Yeah, I'm not ready for that.
But there's three things that make this series extra special, and the first of which is the beautiful writing. Every single sentence in these books is intricately crafted Gothic prose that is dark and twisted and haunting. I read this trilogy slowly so I could drink in every last word. Second is the narrative structure. This story is being told by the main character to a historian sometime after all of the events have taken place. So we have a very unreliable narrator and a non-linear story structure. Both are used to incredible effect. And third, these are vampires done right. You know, instead of just
Marry me.
Yeah, these vampires are actual monsters from hell. In short, Kristoff has done what Christopher Nolan once did a few years ago with Batman Begins, in that they made their subject scary again. Now vampires have gone back to the creepy, kinda messed up origins of their myth and touched on true horror once again. But one last thing to bear in mind before we begin, I do believe this trilogy is brilliant and easily top tier fantasy, but I also don't think it's going to please everyone. It's very dark and scary, sure, but it's also a long story, 3 very thick books that are slow burn in structure. The prose is beautiful but dense and chewy. It's not prose you read to relax, it's prose you wrestle with and study. And the plot skips around a fair bit due to the non-linear story, so you've got to be able to handle a little bit of disorientation. If you're okay with all that, then I think you'll love these books. Now I'm going to pitch this trilogy to you, spoiler-free, listing strengths and weaknesses, and we're going to help you decide if this is a story you want to try. For centuries, vampires would come out at night to prey upon the living, until a great cataclysm occurred, Day's death, and endless clouds permanently blocked out the sun. Now vampire hordes can roam freely across the world and are totally conquering the last refuges of humanity. In the present day, we meet Gabriel de Leon, the last Silver Saint. He is the last of the great vampire hunters of the Order of Saint Michon. Now he is the captive of a great vampire lord awaiting his execution. Yet before he dies, the vampire historian Jean-Francois wishes to write down his story. Because everyone already knows how this story ends. Gabriel is the legendary warrior who slew the Forever King, the greatest of the vampire lords. But he also failed to save the Holy Grail, the one thing that might have reversed this endless night and saved humanity from the vampire hordes. His story is full of triumph and tragedy, and now he is going to tell it in full. Let's talk about the world itself. So first, the world is in the middle of an apocalypse, so everything is collapsing. Now, in the present day, when our narrator is telling this story, we know that humanity has already lost and that the vampires have won, as far as we can tell. But in the early days of the story, there are still some kingdoms and governments, and as the story progresses, social order breaks down entirely. So there's not a lot in the way of countries and politics and society. It's just people in desperate communities trying to survive just a little bit longer. But on the plus side, it means you don't have to study too hard to learn everything about this world. Most of it's destroyed anyway. Makes comprehension easy.
Well, sad, but easier than remembering a bunch of names.
Moving on, everything in the story is French. And I know, but stay with me, it's really not that bad. I'm just kidding. So every person, place, or thing has a French name, but it is mostly just a cool stylistic choice. After all, this is still very much a European-based fantasy, but I think by focusing more on a French aesthetic, it avoids being like all the other more English-based stories and becomes a bit more original. Yet despite everything being French, this doesn't take place in France. This is not just France during the Middle Ages in an alternate history with vampires. This is a fully original fantasy world, that just happens to sound French. There's still a lot of similarity to our own world, but there's a lot that's different too. From a technology standpoint, this is mostly a swords and sorcery type story, but there are a few uses of handguns and anti-personnel explosives. So yeah, add flintlock fantasy to the list of subgenres. Now the cool stuff is the vampires. There are 3 types of them, the first of which are the full-blooded vampires, known as the dead with a capital D. These guys act like living humans, but are totally consumed by their thirst and their cruelty. They live forever, they're super strong, and they're damn near unkillable by regular mortals. They have powers of the mind, and they can shapeshift, and they're burnt by sunlight, you know, all the classics. Plus, these full-blooded vampires can create the other 2 types. So the second type are the wretched, decomposing zombie-like monsters, mindless and infinite, who serve the will of their masters. And they are always on the front lines of the battle. Finally, there are the thralls, humans who are technically still alive, but are mentally enslaved to their vampire master after consuming their blood. The thralls are possibly where the story gets to its darkest point, but we'll come back to that. In order to fight these vampires, we have the Order of San Michon. These are the Silver Saints, servants of God, who train for life to kill these monsters. However, every Silver Saint has some vampiric ability, including the Curse of the Thirst. Not that kind of thirst. Every Silver Saint yearns for blood and will eventually go insane, give in to the thirst, and require putting down. Their only hope is to kill enough vampires to earn a place in heaven, to redeem themselves for the curse they carry. There's a lot more to their powers and abilities, but I'm just going to leave all of that unsaid, don't want to give too much away. There's a ton of religion in this world too. Everyone believes in God and worships the Redeemer. Now, there is a lot in common with this religion and Christianity, but it's not an exact copy-paste. No one mentions Christianity by name, or Jesus. They just mention a lot of similarities, like monotheism, communion, the church, and the Messiah, that sort of thing.
They're the same picture.
What I really like is how religion is depicted, because we have a whole moral spectrum, from crazy violent zealots to devoted believers whose faith gives them courage in the darkest of times, to bitter former believers who have walked away, to atheists and intellectuals. And I think Kristoff writes them all so well. He's not telling you which one is right, but giving you options. You can choose which viewpoint resonates the most with you, except of course the crazy violent zealots.
Take your zealots from the earth.
To be clear, I do suspect some readers will take issue thinking he slams religion a bit much, but I personally thought it was a balanced approach. Now, let's talk about the non-linear story structure. I love this type of story. We have an unreliable narrator who jumps from the past to the present to the future, kind of. This technique is used to incredible effect all throughout the story, and it really sells it. In a word, it's very meta.
Ooh, it's meta now!
Now, the inevitable comparison to this trilogy is The Name of the Wind, where Kvothe is the unreliable narrator as an old man telling his story. The big difference here is that this story is finished, but it's also similar to Sun Eater, where Hadrian Marlowe is writing down his story as an old man. But the big difference is that Kingkiller and Sun Eater tell their stories chronologically. Once the story jumps back to the past, it continues from there in a direct line. But Vampire jumps a few times back and forth. Between Gabriel's childhood initiation and his training in the Order of San Michon, and it tells a story of his later in life in his quest for the Holy Grail, and jumps between them. So book 1 has 3 points in time with 3 different stories. This framing also continues in books 2 and 3, and while I won't spoil it, I'll say vaguely that we have 2 narrators going forward, 2 characters who are describing some overlapping events, but the stories don't always line up. So again, it plays around with narrative structure a lot more than we've seen in other similar books. This story forces you to pay close attention. You can't always trust what you see.
Trust no one!
Plus, sometimes the book tells you things out of order. For example, we learn immediately in the very opening pages of the prologue that Gabriel succeeded in killing the Forever King, but failed to save the Holy Grail. So we learn at the very start how the story ends.
Sorry, spoiler alert.
The brilliance of this technique is that the book tells us what happens without telling us the how or the when. That means it creates some incredible tension where we know some things are inevitable, some great tragedies are inescapable, and so we read every scene waiting for the axe to fall. Also, the characters mock themselves in the story. It's fantastic, it's very funny. So the narrator Gabriel is often mocked by the historian, who calls him out on his dumb decisions, or his melodrama, or for talking about too much smut.
You can never have too much of it.
Or Gabriel calls out his own frustrations at the events he's describing and complaining about his own life. It's a very self-aware story, which also makes it hard to know if it's being entirely honest with us. I've seen a few critics who struggled with this concept, saying it was hard to jump between time frames, or hard to jump between narrators, or that they didn't like knowing the ending up front. And that's fine, it's a little bit different to other books, but for me as a writer, I just thought this was such ambitious storytelling. I mean, Kristoff really understands the craft. He has mastered the mechanics of the storytelling, and he knows how to break the rules, and I just love to see it done. So the writing itself is very lyrical and poetic and haunting, and yet there is a strong presence among critics of people who say that the writing is over the top and edgy and trying too hard to be badass. So what is the prose actually like, more objectively speaking? Well, I think it's, yes, definitely intense. Every line is meant to include something beautiful or dark. It can be very musical and dramatic. But I personally think it avoids becoming edgy because it avoids melodrama. Edgy writing is where everything is exaggerated and extreme, and it usually involves the main character boasting about how badass they are, or crying about how hard their life is.
I would die for Riley. I would die for Riley.
The story avoids this for the most part. Perhaps there is the occasional line of dialogue that is a little bit over the top, but then the historian or narrator will point that out in mockery, so it's very self-aware of its moments of edginess. Still, I think we avoid the melodrama in two ways, and the first is that the narrator himself, Gabriel, doesn't like himself that much, and he plays down a lot of his actions. So the prose lacks the hyperbole. But second, because the story is genuinely dark, this is the apocalypse we're talking about. So the edgy writing is not just exaggerated, the events themselves are just that momentous. Where the prose really shines is the big climactic action scenes. That's where every line is just glorious and epic. It feels like everything we're seeing on page is only a fraction of how amazing it was to witness in person. Although I must say, when the story is in one of its slow burn phases, deeper character work and slower pacing, that's when the fancy prose can become a little arduous. It can make the slow parts feel even slower, but let's talk about that. I really liked the plots of this trilogy, but I have to emphasize again, they are often slow burn. This series requires a fair amount of patience.
Okay, I feel like you're quoting something.
Let me give you an overview of where the series goes so you know if you want to read all three, but I'm going to keep it extremely vague to avoid spoilers. So book one has the two main plot lines we've established already. So Gabriel as a youth training as a vampire hunter, and then Gabriel as an old, bitter man on a quest for the Holy Grail. But book two, Empire of the Damned, is all about trying to liberate a city under vampire occupation. So it's by far the darkest of the three books. Again, there are two plot lines, one inside the city enduring the occupation, and one outside trying to liberate it. I also think this book is the, most slow burn of the three books. Book 3, Empire of the Dawn, is again two plot lines but going in different directions. We have one last attempt to save the world, or an almost suicidal final quest for vengeance. Again, keeping it vague. So in a funny way, each book is quite self-contained, like it's its own story. Each book offers a pretty satisfying ending, with a few threads left over for those who want to continue. Now, I've emphasized the slow burn aspect a few times, let's go deeper. I think the plot is often slow because we go deep with characters, deep with the narrative framing, and with the fancy prose. I think these books have a lot in common with The Realm of the Elderlings, one of my favorite series, because those books also prioritize deep characters over non-stop action scenes and a fast plot. That's where the story chooses to spend its time. These books also all have a very climactic third act, so think like a Sanderlanche event. That's when the books become their most epic. Although, because the ending is so big with such huge action scenes, I think it can make everything that came before that less impactful by comparison. To clarify though, the books are not just one really good third act, there's always something happening throughout the book. It's not like you spend 700 pages waiting just for one big scene at the end, but the slow burn also works really well within the narrative framing. So because the story has been told by a narrator, sometimes the pace changes suddenly and jarringly. Like imagine a slow burn scene where we're talking politics and then the narrator's just like, and then the battle began. Whoa! The skipping in the plot means that we sometimes just skim right past slow scenes, allowing us to go from slow burn to action real quick. So I think the pacing of these novels work really well. It can just be long at times. There were definitely moments in book 2 in particular where I had to sort of push myself to keep going because I knew good stuff was coming, and I think the reaction to the slow burn plot will depend on the individual reader. There's a lot of deep character writing, so I'm going to break it down by function, looking at how Kristoff has written his protagonists, his side characters, and his villains. So our protagonists are given the most time in this story, therefore they're incredibly lifelike. They're human, complex, lovable, frustrating, and flawed. There are 3 protagonists in total, but I won't say who the other 2 are for spoilers. So our main guy, Gabriel, he's pretty awesome. I've seen so many characters like Gabriel become a Mary Sue. He's perfect, badass, untouchable. But this guy's not a Mary Sue. He's very, very flawed. Yes, he's strong, but he also gets his ass kicked many times. He has big successes, but also big failures. So I think Kristoff does an excellent job of writing a tough character who's also very broken in many ways. Yet it's really Gabriel's bitterness that makes his story so sweet. Gabriel has this scathing contempt for all vampires, and he's bitter about all the horrible things in his life, and he hates God himself.
I'm surrounded by idiots.
So he's telling the whole story through this lens of cynicism and spite. Plus, he hates the very historian he's telling the story to. So I just love how we see this change over time as well, where he's only a little bitter in the young plot lines, but then very bitter when he's older, but then also maybe less bitter when he starts trying to have hope again. Now, I want to especially praise Kristoff's side characters, because often when you have a story with a huge protagonist who's telling a tale about his grandiose reputation, it can often lead to a bunch of side characters who are just flat nothings. But that's not what we have here. For example, we have side characters like Aaron DaCosta, one of Gabriel's fellow Silver Saints. Aaron is arrogant and contentious and openly antagonistic towards Gabriel. Yet we see many sides to him through his story. He may be a side character, but he still gets a backstory, a character arc, and proper development, and that's just in book 1. So he's not just a footnote in the Gabriel Chronicles. He's his own main character of his own story. Although it's important to note, this story is very tragic. So this is one of those series where it kind of sucks to be a side character. But these characters are actually developed so well that if or when tragedy strikes, there is genuine heartbreak. They're not just NPCs to be sacrificed for the sake of a good action scene.
My character isn't important enough for a last name because I'm gonna die.
They're not just in the book to make the main characters sad, they are their own people with their own stories. That said, as much as I really like the protagonist and the side characters of these books, I do have some criticism for how the series handles its villains. Because there's a lot of bad guys, whole courts and family lines of evil vampires, and they're seriously cool with some big menacing lines of dialogue. They're sick and twisted and they do some pretty evil stuff. My only complaint is that most of them are kinda the same. All the vampires in this book have pretty much the same personality, just a big nasty glob of chaotic destructive evil. It's a lot like Stargate SG-1 and the Goa'uld System Lords. They all have big personas and famous names and a lot of evil menace, but at the end of the day, most have the same personality, until we meet Baal in Season 5. Baal is the best. The point is, there are so many different vampires in the series, but they do kind of blur together. They become a little predictable, they always do the most evil thing possible, so while I appreciate how cool they were, they blended together a lot. I will say in their favor that there's an interesting hierarchy of how all the vampire lords fit together. The oldest are the most respected and lead the biggest armies, while some have tenuous alliances. Others have terrifying abilities, so they all function in different ways. Also, the historian historian who's writing the story, Jean-Francois, is a good villain. He's convinced of his own morality and superiority while also being a total sexual deviant who takes advantage of all his thralls all the time. He's an actual creep who acts like he's better than everyone else. Like, there's a lot of nuance and contradiction to his character. So I just wish that all the vampire villains were as detailed as him. Still, that leads us to our next segment. There is a lot of blood and guts in this series. Like, fair warning, there are plenty of scenes that will gross you out and make you squeamish. It's not for the faint of heart. I'd give it a 4 out of 5 on the horror scale. Although, to be honest, I struggle to measure horror because I'm very comfortable about reading extreme violence. And I read this trilogy and thought, oh yeah, some decent horror, yeah. And then I saw reviews online and were like, this is the most graphic extreme horror ever. I'm like, it is? Oh dear. So take that 4 out of 5 on the horror scale with a grain of salt. But there's violent torture, the vampires do some messed up stuff to their victims, there's some bodily mutilations, there's fight scenes that are brutal and full of gore, there's many depictions of a vampire's obsession with blood, yearning for blood like it's a powerful drug. The most horrifying thing, in my opinion, is thralldom. The humans whose minds have been completely broken, forcing them to obey their vampire lords in all things, including committing acts of violence against themselves when ordered to. This is the darkest thing, because many of the thralls are also sexual slaves. Sure, they crave the affection of their master, but only because they're under the influence. They're intoxicated, and you legally cannot give consent while intoxicated, I say before someone tries to excuse it. But that leads us to all the smut. So there is a decent amount of it. I'd say like a 3 out of 5 on the smut scale. Although to be clear, it's still a lot more smut than you normally get in the fantasy genre. So if you normally just read fantasy, 3 out of 5 might seem pretty high to you. These smut scenes make great use of the poetic writing style, using dark and haunting language to create a sense of forbidding. So it's not graphic sex so much as it is intense passion. And the book also makes use of the narrative framing, so sometimes the historian or the narrator will interject mocking how intense the visual descriptions are. And the historian Jean-Francois is also a sexual deviant, so he often pushes for more detail, so it fits well within the frame of the story. The real overlap between the horror and the smut is all about the thirst for blood. When a vampire or a silver saint is intimate, it's harder for them to resist the lure. So every sex scene has this undertone of tension, where it could turn deadly at any second. Plus, some of the sex scenes, well, they include biting and bleeding and drinking, and it can be a bit gross. I know some people don't appreciate an overlap between horror and erotica, but there is an audience for that. That said, you may still think it goes too far. I heard this for years, that Jay Kristoff was a problematic person who wrote problematic books. It's the reason why I actually put off reading his books for so long. But now that I've read them, it turns out I don't think there's anything problematic about these at all. And if you watch my channel for a while, you know I don't really hesitate to call out this type of thing. But I don't think it's deserved here, and I'm kind of annoyed that this is the reputation the series has. So let's talk about it, and as a disclaimer, this is just my opinion. I strongly encourage you to use your own judgment. First, some context. Kristoff has written 4 series now. The first 2 were the Illuminae Files and Aurora Rising, co-written with Amy Kaufman. As an aside, I interviewed Amy Kaufman on this channel, and she's an amazing person, and she wholeheartedly recommended and vouched for Jay Kristoff. She's the person who actually convinced me to read his other books. But both of these series that they wrote together were young adult series. Then Kristoff went off on his own to write his next 2 series, Nevernight and Empire of the Vampire. These 2 series were very much adult, not young adult. And he made that very clear. And yet, people still consider him to be a young adult author. There are videos on YouTube calling Empire of the Vampire a young adult series, which is just so frustrating. Kristoff says over and over, these are adult books, not suitable for teenagers. I think Kristoff has a lot of readers who have misjudged this series from the get-go and expect it to be a lot more family-friendly. Or these are readers who just haven't read dark fantasy and aren't aware of how dark the genre can get. Because I think a lot of the dark content in this series that people freak out about are actually genre standard practice. I think the issue is that people still don't understand the boundaries of the young adult genre, and also we punish authors who try to move between genres. But to be specific, there are 3 sexual things in this series that some people have taken issue with. There's an underage sex scene in book 1, there's a sex scene between a vampire and his thralls, which is very clearly non-consensual, and many of the vampires are pedophiles who prey on children. So obviously this is all pretty uncomfortable stuff, and it might mean that this series is just not for you. That's totally okay. Now, the underage sex scene is between 2 14-year-olds, although to be honest, it's not really a sex scene, more like a make-out scene with a bit of foreplay. I mean, spoilers. But I hate to say it, this is kind of normal in grimdark. It shows up in Game of Thrones, in the Daenerys plotline, or in the Demon Cycle. I've seen some people compare it to Stephen King's It with the infamous child orgy scene, but it's nowhere near that excessive. As for the other 2 issues, the vampire and his thralls and the general pedophilia, it's very clear that these are the bad guys doing bad things. It's not an endorsement from the author. I mean, there's a scene where a vampire arrives and the reader thinks, oh boy, let's go fight that guy. And then we see a young girl who's enthralled to him in his entourage, and we go, whoa, now we're gonna f this guy up. It's clearly framed as if we should be outraged by this. Now I know, some people will say, okay, I get that it's bad, but why put it in a book? I don't want to read about that. Oh, I don't know. Why did he write about a powerful and violent empire where all the people in charge were pedophiles? Maybe to make it realistic, but seriously, that is part of the appeal of the grimdark genre. The unflinching confrontation of all the darkness of humanity and life itself. So in summary, I completely understand if this is just an automatic stopping point for you and you don't want to read on from here. No judgment at all. But I don't believe this series is in any way unethical or glorifying sexual crimes. There's lots of different representation in these books. There's men and women in equal roles of power and agency within the story. There's people from different races and cultures and beliefs. Yet most of the representation focuses on queer characters. There's an Archillian romance plotline where 2 men fall in love but are ostracized by the church for their relationship. There's a sapphic romance plot between 2 women falling in love in the darkest of places. And there are multiple bisexual characters who change partners throughout the series. So it's not just a case of this book has queer people in it, but rather it's telling their stories. Now the big question, is the ending worth it? I loved the ending of the 3rd book. It was incredible. My emotions were all over the place. I was literally ugly crying at one point. And then I went online and realized that a whole bunch of people found it controversial and even hated it with a passion. So what happened? Now, avoiding spoilers, but the contention around the ending comes down to the fact that our unreliable narrator did not always tell the truth. Which I thought was obvious from page 1, but a lot of people got mad about it. Personally, I think the ending delivered on exactly what was promised, including major surprises. And how much should you try? Look, the 1st book was pretty much an instant bestseller. It's a great book. You can try book 1 right away and you'll know if this is the right series for you and if you'll enjoy the full thing. So good luck and happy reading. And thank you for watching. If you want to support my work, please check out my own books, The Immortal Investigations, an urban fantasy series that is now available in audiobook form from your retailer of choice. You can also check out my shop and my Patreon, links to all of those in the description below. And subscribe if you want to see more deep dives into books like this one, and let me know your thoughts on these books because comments help my algorithm. So I'll see you next time, and I hope you enjoy a good book today. Bye!